Welcome, everybody, whoever is joining us live and whoever is joining us looking at this on the replay. We are here with Rory in the Masters of Flow Summer Talks, which is a series initiated by our community, a community of flow, peak performance, neuroscience coaches, and successful professionals from all walks of life who joined together in the past year in this high-level elite training. With deep curiosity and love for exploring the next level of human possibility, human performance, human productivity, and ultimately expanding our human potential. So I'm so happy to be here with Rory. He's one of the co-organizers of the event, my good friend. We've had many wonderful, insightful, and exciting talks during the past year. So Rory, let's take it away. Let's introduce ourselves a little bit briefly for the people who don't know us.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so my name's Rory Lemon. I go by Rory Lemon Aid online, AID to help. Uh, and that's it's all about my healing journey, where I went from in my past, with the mind recovered from mental exhaustion, crippling anxiety, and a period of psychosis, and was like, wow, I got better in 14 weeks with manual treatment on my feet. And I was that was so quick that and so incredible that I just wanted to learn more about healing, and my mantra became, what else is possible to change? So I'm sure I'll go into more of this uh, shortly, because we're talking about neurodivergent creativity and how that all blends into my story. But yeah, so that recovery process just led me into um, studying about massage and philosophies of healing and science, osteopathy, and then now creativity, creative flow coaching, neuro creative leadership, and so many other things that I want to talk about.
That is quite a colorful background and story. And for me, it's been a long journey as well. My official profession has been 20 years in the corporate communications spectrum. I've directed many teams in communications in the public PR space, public relations, advertising. And while I love communications and I always felt that it was a natural characteristic of mine, at some point I completely burned out and I questioned many times if this was the right profession, if this was the right field, and what is my dharma, what is my strength, why am I here, why am I doing this? And that led me to pivot just about 6 years ago to really understand why I was doing everything that I was doing. I thought I thought I had a good goal, a good target. I felt like I did well in my life, but there was always this deeper piece missing. And as I went into this soul journey and did a lot of healing work and a lot of inner work, then the next piece was, okay, how do I create in the world in a way that feels true, that feels fulfilling, and it also sustains a level of well-being? Because I noticed that as I did more and more healing, and more and more I leaned into a life that I love and is authentic, there was this deep fear about creating next level projects and coming out as a coach and working with more and more and more clients. There's this deep fear of a program from the past that I don't want to have the same experience that I did before. And once I get into something that I am interested in, then I go full in, and then I tend to burn out because we don't know how to work. We just have a calendar and we book everything in and we become a slave to everybody else's energy and time schedule. So the flow field, the flow neuroscience, and this level of high performance was really the next huge window that I was just so happy to encounter, to learn how to create the next level of my life where I can work, I can live, I can enjoy, I can take breaks, I can really have a good, well, wholesome, and balanced life. And I feel that that is exactly what the flow piece is bringing into the field of peak performance and high productivity.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Fantastic. There's so many things that you mentioned that just I get excited by those words, and some maybe some people will get excited by them. Some people will be like, what does that all mean?" And yeah, but it's all learning, and that's where it comes back around to where I link the sort of learning the flow cycle is not just to get into it's learning how to be efficient with getting into flow and then back out of it.
Mm.
It's just as important, especially for those that are neurodivergent, because they may be in flow in something that they don't want to be in and they don't realize until
Mhm.
later, and then they go, and
Mhm.
that's what is fascinating for me, what I've learned from for myself along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I love this topic on neurodivergent creative leadership. And one of the first conversations that we ever had together was as you were explaining your journey into this realm, into this title now, which is so clear for you. As you're describing neurodivergent brains, I was thinking that sounds like pretty much everybody I know. It sounds very much like my brain, even though I never really put like a name to it. And and I'm curious to ask from your perspective, from your experience now in the space, how is flow maybe different for neurodivergent brains than it would be for normal, I mean, for I guess what you would call the other kind of brain. So like how would you identify the difference of flow for this different kinds of brains?
It's wow. It's a big, great. It's like a big funnel that's just opened up, and that's one thing that I like to say is that potentially neurodivergence is not the same as divergent thinking, but they are linked. So this
Mhm.
idea of divergent thinking is to when we relax, well, typically, and again, how do I? Yeah, so even what is called neurotypical,
Mhm.
um, and that is becomes about discovering what feels normal for someone, or what is normal, or what is perceived as normal, is
Right.
actually useful because
Mhm.
I'm going to sort of start from a place of how to understand it because there's a lot of blame that goes on. It's like, oh, it's neurotypical. I don't fit into neurotypical or neuro or whatever it is. But actually, all science aims to achieve is to find common patterns in things, and those common patterns then is a neurotypical pattern or a typical pattern in life, so that we can see what is common, so that we could see what works specifically that works for a number of people or a group of people or all people, and then see if it relates to the individual. And so that's what I like to just set the scene here that
Mm.
that's what I believe all science studies the results is neurotypical and
Mhm.
will only contain certain information across a certain group of people. But if you've got the whole spectrum of how different brains um, can or react and respond and learn in their own environment from their habits, their patterns, their ways of their experiences, to go, I'm going more general,
Mhm.
and that kind of neurodivergence would be something that doesn't necessarily, or being neurodiverse is feeling like different to a particular
Mhm.
reference
Right.
point of neurotypicality.
Right.
So it's not just that what the brain will do is just group everything really quickly to like
Mhm.
categorize it and get it out of sight or out or into sight, whether it's important to deal with that concept at that time. And
Mm.
so that's why it's very difficult to just say that, these people will react this way or this way. It's only really up until now, it's about science and medicine coming together and going, what looks normal, what is normal and what is abnormal, and how that is being filtered through a institutional or a societal drift, which is not actually real. It's
Mm,
just stories along the way that have inbuilt a sense of judgment. And
mm,
so when we, and even the sense of judgment against society is a trick of the judgment inside of us we've learnt. So
mhm,
if I go, oh, it's all society's fault or all the government's fault, then I'm giving my attention, my power to that. And
right.
so when it comes, I'm kind of coming back round to noticing all of that and re-establishing a sense of where I'm putting my judgment, where I'm placing my attention. Because as soon as that comes together, it
Mm,
becomes back to attention, which then can drive us into a flow of what we do want to create or what we don't want to create. And that's the creativity part.
yeah.
So, so neurodivergence is a route.
Mhm,
Creativity is what we have all the time, and
mhm,
we can either own that or we can disown it and
mm,
give power away to our attention somewhere else through judgment or blame in a negative
mm,
cycle that can just cause ourselves to be upset.
mhm,
It doesn't really help anyone. Um,
mhm,
or we can stand up and stand outside of it. So the neurocreative leadership is about learning. Neurocreative leadership is becoming responsible for our thoughts, feelings, and actions, and knowing that we can find people that also be in groups to all learn around that. And it's not one person that is the leader. We all are leaders, and we can all choose to create what we want. And so
mm,
that's the piece that's coming through for me. It's not just
mhm,
up to one person anymore. So it's a
right.
sense of neuroplastic changes in
Mhm,
brains individually, as well as
mhm,
the cohort,
mhm,
the neurotypical
mhm,
understandings, and we can take the best
mhm,
of all of this and create new stories and
right.
work on those new stories rather than those old stories. So that's the best way I
Mhm.
can describe all of that all at once.
Yeah, fascinating, fascinating. And you've been coaching and you've been learning about this for quite some time now. And I'm curious from all of your experience with your clients, what would be like your typical clients? What is their experience of a neurodivergent brain like?
So it's often the case of there's three things that come up that I've noticed that I'm attracting people that are in my kind of
Mhm,
cohort of neurodivergence. So you've got
mhm,
things like symptoms related to ADHD,
mhm,
dyslexia, autism, and they're
mhm,
all can be related to personality types as well that
mhm,
I've noticed, and how we react and respond, or what we've learned. Again, reacting and responding either negatively to something or
mhm,
positively, and how that is being learned to be more extreme. So
mhm,
me, I'm more deep feeling, empathic,
mhm,
if you want to call it that. Um,
mhm,
and that's the sort of central route. That's none of this is negative or positive or right or
right.
wrong. That is what I sense that when I feel something, it it's like it overtakes me, and I'm having to learn how to like ride those waves of feelings
Mhm,
like I'm on the boat of them above the waves. Otherwise, if I'm
mhm,
in it, I feel like I'm drowning. That's the best way of describing it. I like to describe feelings like
mhm,
water in some way, and they can be strong enough to pull us with inertia. So when we try to change a habit, the feeling is like,
mhm,
well, don't go against that. Go, it's like
right.
trying to stop whilst going
Mhm,
in a whirlpool, and
mhm,
the drive to like carry on doing the same things or feel the same things pulls us
mhm,
subconsciously because that's what it's used to.
mhm,
So, so that's what I notice around with helping others that are neurodivergent is they've gone down a particular neurological route. They've created
mhm,
beliefs and reactivities to what those beliefs are in particular situations. It could be sound, it could be
mhm,
um, touch. They could anything that they struggle with relates back
mhm,
to who they
mhm,
believe they are, and then that's causing, and then what they've learned about whether they feel
mhm,
wrong in the world for feeling the way they feel, which is all
mhm,
all been passed on somehow. And it may be one person that passed and learnt taught them that, but it's not necessarily. They're just the
Mhm.
reflection of where they've learnt it from the past as well.
Mhm.
So it's remember again, it comes back down to like stripping down the judgment, helping people to strip down the judgment and just to feel and notice that there's a lot of feelings. The second and then the last piece is remembering, because those feelings stop us remembering to do the things we do want to do, because we keep people will remember all the things that they think that they've done wrong as they
Mhm.
try to change that habit. So the habits and the feelings and the beliefs are all so strong that it takes time to break those down. Not just time, but actual repetition, focus, and energy. And the longer, the more intensive that is, the more it can change more quickly. So it's not
Mhm.
necessarily time; it's more the right set of knowledge, guidance, and space and focus and
Mhm.
energy to shift those feelings and to start remembering to remember. It's a classic quote that from one of my clients, and other people have mentioned it too in some one way, shape, or form. Remembering to remember is one of the difficulties that clients often face to get up and
Mhm.
then just mental scatter. It's like remembering to remember, or focusing on one thing, going from divergent, too many options in the negative, rather
Mhm.
than coming back to convergent action, which is let's just relax for a moment and meditate, learn to meditate in our own way
Mhm.
that calms things down, and then plan what you do want, and keeping it simple and divergently thinking into the positive
Mm.
rather than the negative.
Yeah, very interesting. I find a lot of similarities in, I guess, in the challenges that I have faced as a leader in the corporate world, running departments in the communications field, working in large corporations with many departments and working with many high level executives as well as middle management and then the teams. And I guess the similarities that I would find where I feel like I found a lot of challenge and what how flow has changed that around for me right now is in the fact that there's always a lot of conflict, meaning it just like flow was very rare. And if I ever experienced flow is probably just when I was in that phase of creating a strategy, a communication strategy. And that was a moment where inspiration would come and then I was free to basically dream and create ideas. But then in communication, trying to get a project, trying to get an idea, trying to get a whole group of people to align with that idea, I feel that many times you mentioned feelings and empathy. And one thing that I've learned in this second leg of my life, when I started to listen to my feelings and understand my feelings, is that I think that empathy is a big piece that in the corporate world, in my experience, I don't know how many of those people were neurotypical or neurodivergent, but I think that a big piece of the conflict that we constantly had as a peoples was this piece of empathy that while some people might be more empathic than others, I think we're all empathic. So we all felt each other's struggle or confusion, but I believe we are not trained to listen to the other person's feelings and be empathetic in the form of, oh, it's okay that this person feels this way. It's not an attack towards me, and it's not a rejection of my ideas and feelings.
Mm.
And that's the piece that I learned later on, that am I empathetic or am I not empathetic? And I found myself, I am empathetic because I can feel other people's feelings. I can feel their energy when they're nervous. I can feel when they're open. But I became very numb in the sense that I didn't have space to think how other people felt. My job, my goal, my focus, my training was numbers, business goals, getting things done, getting things out there, and then the only measure of success was how well the campaign did, how much, is the product being sold because of the campaign or things like that. So I think that the empathy piece is something that, while we all are born with it, in our life, if we are not in a community that supports that supports the processing of emotions, that a community that evolves their emotional intelligence, it doesn't stunt it, then we become numb to our ability to be empathetic to our own feelings and to other people's feelings. And this was a huge doorway for me in this journey of healing from the burnout and getting in touch with my own emotional experience of life, emotional experience of other people's feelings. And I think it's a key piece. And I like that you mentioned that you brought that up, because I think that's similar to all of us, right? It's a human thing for us to flow when we are in empathy with each other, when we have that intelligence to understand our feelings and other people's feelings.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. It's really nice to hear those pieces and um the points that come up around that are um th- yeah, the way empathy is so important,
Mhm,
um and it's almost it is teachable in a lot of ways, because but it's that sense of what it means to different people, because some people may have emotional waves that they can't turn off, and it may be in response to mirror neurons in the brain to someone else's reactivity, like you said about when you sense how someone is feeling, and it's like maybe learning to switch that off is it's difficult to then switch it back on again, because it does feel too strong if we were to switch it back on again, or something. But yeah, the way I like to differentiate it in that way is that those that are more rational minded, that maybe can't sense or maybe have become numb. Like you said, it's a natural, innate
mhm,
thing that some maybe
mhm,
at some point it got switched off for someone to be more in an assertive, this is what I believe kind of
mhm,
control. And again, it can be positive, like a positive trait
mhm,
to go and not feel what anyone else is feeling. Like paramedic, for instance, needs to not be caught up in what someone else's pain, and to be able to just get on with the job,
mhm,
um and that sort of self-command to be assertive, this is what I believe needs to happen right now, kind of thing. And so what I call the difference between empathic, which is what people will say when they say they can't switch off the feel, and it can be a negative connotation to it, but it can I think empathy can only be around wanting to understand someone else's plight or struggle with. It's not really necessarily about the feeling. It can choose to be like sense it, and then it is that connectivity, but it doesn't have
mhm,
to be overtaking. So empathy and being empathic is the positive skill, and I start to call it sympathic when someone synthesizes the sympathy. It's synthesizing, and they can't necessarily turn it off. So that's why I like to describe it, to remind people that empathy is the real supportive, connective, wanting to understand and help out to make things better in the world, and improve human connection and human
mhm,
sustainability with
mhm,
through empathy is the only way. First
mhm,
of all, 'cause when you have empathy, you can't have judgment at the same time.
mhm,
You can only want to connect or help. So,
mhm,
understanding is empathy, and sort of sympathy, the way
mhm.
I describe it. Again, someone might say that it's empathy that's like that, and sympathy is the other one. But it's
Mhm,
like whatever words we try to explain, but the concept is
mhm,
that one is like a positive, and one can be um, detrimental. Or
mhm,
we have to feel in some way, or want to know how that feels in order to understand
mhm,
it. Like switching it off is a key piece. Um,
mhm.
yeah, and then when you say about communication in teams as well, that's fascinating as well, understanding personality types. So just briefly, what's come up for me there is like um is that sense of where I see it can be useful to have a neurodivergent or a neurodiversity advisory or even neurocreative leadership leader or something where someone can advise on looking at personality traits, which is done already, but it's been personality traits for people that have been accepted into the job already. And then they're trying to make teams out of people that have logically described that they can do something or other. And then they're trying to make a teamwork based on that. Whereas you can actually employ people that are, if it was, if people were able to break through and it was okay with no judgment, again, no judgment to say, hey, I'm like this, but also I, I, I'd say, for instance, ADHD, the positive traits of ADHD is uh, can be sensitive, highly creative, more of a on the go people person, organizer than a sit down trying to map and plan out something kind of, or lots of cognitive maths, which won't necessarily, it would be too much of a struggle. Find their positive traits in
Mm.
in whatever their personality traits are that lead to those symptoms, and pick people specifically that all have different ways of applying decision making processes to that teamwork. And then you've got like all you'd need is like a dream team of about six people that can
Mhm.
all input in different ways.
Mhm.
And that's where I see the communication piece coming into mind. I haven't talked about that yet specifically, but it's that idea of designing teams based on neurodiversity
Mhm.
specifically is really fascinating to me.
Yeah, definitely should be the next top thing to really study and bring into the corporate world, because it seems that a big part of the struggle is not understanding how each person's decision making process is working, how their level of also something else that's coming up as you're talking is the level of safety that we feel. And when I think of empathy, and when I think of communication in groups and creating, expanding larger and larger and larger projects in a group setting, and as a leader, that's one of the key things, is also creating this level of safety. And I find that many people are not performing at their highest because they don't feel safe, because they don't feel that they are heard or seen, or that their level of expression will be perceived differently from others, whether that's a neurodivergent way of thinking or whatever way of thinking. And as I think back to my 20 years experience, the safest I felt was always, and the safest I felt and the more flow that I felt was only when I was in the space of working by myself, doing my own creative ideas and putting my strategies down. The rest of the time did not feel very safe. And therefore, there's a lot of contraction. There's a lot of things that didn't go flowy. And as I've come to understand how flow works and all this body of research on flow neuroscience and neurobiology, I recognize how little bit in how little tiny bit of flow did I or any of my peers or any of my colleagues and staff for that matter ever experience flow in our professional life. So curious what you think about that. Is flow like this holy grail in the neurodivergent creative leadership field for you? Do you find that it's really rare?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's actually an understood term. A lot of the people that I connect with and work with because they've become, and it's kind of where it relates to my story as well. They become creative as a way to manage their mental health, to feel safe, to, like you said, safety. Because if they're overreactive and feeling like we don't fit in to society because of the neurotypical being so strong, information and stories. That's why I learned guitar at the age of I picked up the guitar at the age of 16, not knowing how to communicate my ideas and my voice other than what I was just feeling so much, but not knowing how to. I hadn't practiced talking, and I didn't know that I could because I believed that that was the way I was, and it wasn't like, hey, all the things that you think you can't do, those are that's where the gold is to study and get stronger at, so that there's a balance in flow with the rest of getting on with things.
Just tying the conversation into basically into flow and how common or how rare flow is for leadership. And I was asking Rory, in his field of work and all of his experience, does this seem like the holy grail? Because in my work, in my background, in my corporate and institutional work, as I still see my colleagues, I think that it's still a very rare thing. And I don't think that most people really know the possibility and the opportunity of what it is like to work from a flow perspective and create a flow-based work environment. So what is your experience, Rory?
Oh yeah, so I was meant I think I was mentioning how um the the flow understanding of flow and people I got into using music to get into flow to manage mental health in the first place, and how that was then so I knew how to get into it, but I didn't know th that I could apply it to everything else in my life. And so that's where I think that it's interesting, because with artists and creatives, they when they say flow, they it's often talked about in the past that um that it was more of a getting intuitive, getting into an intuitive flow with a creative process was more sporadic and was related to mood, and or maybe artists of the past would use certain particular substances, chemicals or substances that they would use, like alcohol, for instance, to keep going and keep going. And there's a lot of creatives in the past would rely on particular ways to stay in flow, which wouldn't help their health whatsoever. And it's just not known that it's a how to prime and proliferate, prime and proliferate, uh, that creative process. So taking it from that perspective to um, designing or working with how to lead. And when I talk about leadership, it is about leading the self and an equal amount of listening and proactive sharings of what's necessary or what is felt is necessary. So it is an emerging field around what we can do, because with neurodivergent and creative leadership, to me, it's how entrepreneurialism can be done collaboratively as well, and how that could be that everyone's got their own projects, but can sort of
Mhm.
switch and swap around, or be like more like a mastermind group where each skill builds and completes completes a movement, in a mini movement, to create the ideas that can be done individually. To individual businesses can be also in flow at the same time as a group collaborative support around that, which I'm just really fascinated with, because then it can move away from some office environments or some unnecessary corporations. I'm not here to demonize anything from before, otherwise I'd be upset myself. So it's a case of just build new systems and focus on them and stay in vision with that. So Leadership is about having a certain vision that inspires beyond the self. That's what I learned myself as well. So it's like the taking the flow is the real how to, because
Mhm.
it's actually quite simple once it's learned, and once that simplicity of making things simple,
Mhm.
knowing what's going to distract, what doesn't distract, what
Mhm.
what can trigger getting into flow, why it's important to embody rest
Mhm.
and digest, and the cycle goes round, whether it can be like a mini
Mhm.
project in a day or a long project, and how those businesses can thrive individually, and
Mhm.
people stop necessarily buying into things that they
Mhm.
don't need or want, but through needless
Mhm.
advertising, or a machine that's just going round, and people going and working where the work is rather than creating the work themselves.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's what I see as fascinating about all of this.
True. And very fascinating for me as well was the experience that flow did not belong in the everyday grind, quote unquote. That flow somehow was just something you can experience when you're having fun, when you're doing something, that you love to do, or it belongs to the extreme athletes and to it was always for the few. And whereas in the corporate world and in general in the working environment, it's always thought of work is work and fun is fun or play is play. And when you realize the potential that we have for the level of creativity and performance that we have when we are in that flow state, when we are playing, when we are making music, whatever it is that really gets us into flow, that level of performance, that level of creativity is so powerful that now this whole work that Stephen Kotler and many other people in the field of flow neuroscience are recognizing that if this is the highest human potential, then it can actually come into the everyday life of everyday businesses and everyday leaders, and that it's no longer the domain of only those special few who have the discipline to do what you need to do to get into flow, but rather flow is very trainable, and the potential for the level of productivity and the level of well-being that working in flow can bring, it is for me along the lines of therapy of all kinds. Being in a flow state while performing at your best is super therapeutic, is super healing, and and it can also create really deep relationships because especially in leadership, if you can get into flow with your team and you can create a flow environment, a flow company, then the level of bonding, the level of well-being in relationships and in your own personal life, it's quite incredible.
Love it.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that I can really bring left that I haven't said without just going over things again is what I think what I got from what you were describing there was, as also the flow isn't necessarily the actual perceived task, that this it's like it's any skill, learning any skill whatsoever, be it looking after yourself, learning what techniques work for a particular person, or for active recovery, getting into a flow of that, or a flow of what I describe it potentially between the opposites of chaos and order, or structure and spontaneity, and and um and how some people are more like to be spontaneous, and they're in flow with spontaneity. As soon as they try to stick to something and organize something, that breaks their flow. But then it's that prolonging, I call prolonging the wronging, and the struggle phase of learning something like getting into structure, which is obviously has completely helped me manage getting things done that I want to actually create in life rather than just sort of creating without presenting or communicating what the value is, or learning how to reflect, uh or and like a skill of just reflective practice of writing, and going from like brain dump to really specific things that I want to do.
Mm.
All of that took time to and focus energy rather than time, but and I now can get into a flow of that, or I can get into a flow of this, or get into a flow of that. So
Mhm.
organization for
Mhm.
those that are less organized, it's important to learn how to get into flow with organization, or the other way
Right.
around. Those that are too organized get fixed as well, OCD, or whatever you want to call it. That is someone struggles with things being not the way that they want it in that moment. Uh, to deal with any chaos that comes along that changes things is where they would get to be better learning how to get into flow with being more spontaneous and enjoying the ride of not knowing what's happening, or that kind of stuff. So yeah, I love that idea of chaos and structure, and where we feel we're more aligned with
Mhm.
is are we are, is there anything that we're avoiding in life? And that's what I love to help people with, is to notice that, notice what they may be avoiding,
Mhm.
where they could build on their strengths first, because often neurodivergence can again be so upset about wronging themselves or wronging something else as an automated thing, that they're not necessarily able to see
Mhm.
clearly what they want to learn in order to help them. So even just that mapping it out and getting
Mhm.
clear on where their personality is comfortable, and making sure that they feel that they can come back to their strengths every single time, so that they don't feel unsafe trying to work on their weaknesses. Because sometimes coaching just is like,
Mhm.
pick your fears and just go for them straight away.
Mhm.
That doesn't necessarily help with the feeling safe enough to at all manage it. It can just be too much. So
Yeah.
build on the strengths,
Mhm.
uh, graded exposure to the challenges, and seeing what's possible to change from there.
Beautifully said. And as we have come at the end of our call, it's always been fascinating conversating together. And especially when we get to this point, it just feels like the conversation has just started. There's just so much in there that we love to just explore endlessly. And I'm sure, and I look forward to future collaborations together. Your take on flow, I think, is fascinating. And I think creative leadership is the next level of real leadership that can can bring performance, bring achievement, and can bring well-being as well. So thank you for doing your work, Rory.
Thank you, Iris. Who do you help before we wrap up? Who do you help?
I help women going through midlife, which is really myself. I just seeing how my journey went and looking around and seeing that we're actually all having the same exact experience. And when we start to share, when we start to talk about it, when we start to see it as an opportunity for the next level of our humanness, the next level of our evolution, the next level of possibility, rather than a crisis, rather than the end of an of life or apocalyptic. So now it's my passionate fulfillment and mission to work with women who are moving through their midlife transition and are in leadership and are powerhouses who all of that energy is just being burned out because we haven't learned how to manage our own energy and to learn how to flow it, how to bring it into the flow and ultimately create an intentional life, a life that we love to live.
Amazing. Amazing. Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
It's
Excellent.
been lovely, lovely, lovely being in conversation with you. Thank you, everybody, for watching this live or in the replay. And we'll be back soon.
Thanks for listening and watching. Love to hear your comments, highlights.